Welcome back to a special Fantasy Labs podcast edition. I just recorded, what was it, last night? I guess 2 nights ago with Justin Phan about our new NBA products. And I'm here back with Justin. What's going on, man?
Yeah, another day, another podcast. This is seeming quite familiar. Getting back into the routine. That's how I know NBA is back.
That's right. That's right. And I'm also joined by Colin Davy. You know him from our PGA pods. And we're bringing him on a special edition of the NBA pod because we have an exciting announcement. And before we get into it, Colin, I'll just ask how you are. You've been traveling. You're back working and doing some good stuff for us.
Yeah, hi for the regular readers. Do not adjust your television set. Yes, the golf man is on the NBA podcast. This is not a mistake. Brian, I still feel like I need to talk about JB Holmes in some form. So maybe I can point him on the NBA podcast, but all right, well, I'll try to keep it topical here. But yes, speaking of vaguely golf related, I was in Europe for the Ryder Cup. And Brian, you'll be happy to know I finally broke my one rule. I actually did watch a little bit.
Wow.
It was Patrick Reed versus Rory McIlroy. If golf were like that all the time, I would actually watch games.
Right.
Well, PGA, your move.
Right. Perfect pairing. Yeah, it was great. Yeah. I'm jealous and excited to hear more about your trip. So the point of this special edition, and Justin and I released a podcast that we talked about all the new tools, and we're going to have tutorials. We're going to have all sorts of stuff explaining the new tools and everything we have to offer. But we felt like there was a new edition that was so special, so groundbreaking, so innovative that we had to devote just a special pod to it, which is we're projecting ownership in NBA this year. And before I go into anything further, Colin, I'm going to kick to you since this is your doing. So I feel like you deserve the honor of explaining it to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to help. So I was just talking with some of the FantasyLabs higher-ups and kind of spitballing, all right, I'd love to do stuff for other sports, because PGA is going pretty well. I think I had some models that kind of have some applicability to other sport, and ownership projections are probably our biggest needs across any sport in the industry, for that matter. And a couple ones that I was excited to field test in NBA. And it's been a fun research process. It's fun talking with the NBA team and kind of going in the back and forth. And I'm really excited about what we have because I think our approach that we have is something that's really different from a lot of other people out there. You're able to use a lot more advanced analytics that can capture some of the very interesting dynamics of NBA ownership, predicting it from day to day. So we'll get into a little bit of the high level, what it means, some applicability, but can't wait to talk about it. Should be fun.
Yeah, Justin, I know this is in the works for you for a while, getting Colin on board to do this. And I know you're super excited to have this as a big feature in our NBA product this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think NBA in and of itself is kind of a different beast in terms of how to tackle ownership, just because it's so news influenced, and how do you handle a sport where ownership can change dramatically within the last hour, and how do you dynamically adjust for that? And I'm super thrilled that we have this feature on because as we do news really well here, and projection changes within the minute, really up to date. And with that now, ownership projections will change dynamically too, based on all that information. So it's huge for us to have that. And in these last minute decisions where you're trying to gather all this information and make optimal choices for tournaments, I think this is really, really important.
Yeah, for sure. So, just some background. We have projected ownership for NFL models. That's something that Adam Levitan, you guys know him. He does our NFL news, and he's on our NFL pods every week. And he projects ownership. NFL is a little bit different. It's not quite as late breaking news heavy. So it's not like there's incoming data that just can drastically change a slate 15 minutes before lock. So NBA is just sort of a different animal. Colin, I'll kick back to you. What sort of, I know we don't want to get into, directly, how you did this, but was that a big challenge, was trying to figure out a model that was able to, quickly update and deal with sort of the intricacies of slates changing dramatically just because of single player going out of the player pool?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just given how fluid the nature of NBA news is and how things can change last minute, the challenge is really coming up with essentially a model type that captured that complexity. I think some of the simpler models you see are kind of almost like they're not even necessarily models out there now that any other sport. They're kind of like weighted averages of what people think are generally important. But especially in NBA, you have all of these potential inputs ranging from how late breaking the news is, what they're actually projected to do, how many games there are, what position they play, and all of these are incredibly interactive and overlapping. And it's a very complicated environment. So the reason I'm happy with so much of this is because it essentially requires some of these more complex, non-linear approaches that kind of capture that interactivity. And from the QA process and kind of as Justin and I have iterated on this model, I think it's capturing the major behavior, and it's kind of interesting to see how that behavior actually plays out and what is or isn't is important. I'm pretty sure that people will probably coast on, essentially myths of ownership going forward, things they know to be true. But the fact that we have it in an encapsulated process, I think, is just really miles ahead of what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's groundbreaking, innovative stuff. Justin, so, this is something you've been working on with Colin for a while. What are some things, some interesting things or just some things that have stood out to you, things you've learned just from looking at, the process of projecting ownership?
Yeah, I think in the QA process, we kind of broke down, individually kind of our biggest misses, trying to make, the projected ownership better and more accurate. And a lot of, really tied back to what we were just talking about, a lot of the bigger misses had to do with late news and, kind of taking and, processing that. I think what I noticed maybe is that people tend to kind of overreact to late news a little bit. And you see like dramatic ownership shifts. More, you see guys who shouldn't be owned at a certain level, just consistently at that level where, they're over-owned. And, I think, what you can take away from that is there's real opportunity here to fade these guys given the right situation. And, there's certain situations, you weren't fading Russell Westbrook last year when Kevin Durant was out. But there are a lot of other situations where it makes sense. Prime example being fading a guy who doesn't really offer much of a diverse and all-around line. So if his shot isn't falling or one area of his game is lacking, then it makes it really hard for him to deliver substantial return on his value. So I think, you can look at these high-owned guys, beneficiary news, and be more selective in picking which ones you have to play and which ones you can afford to fade based on what you think their ownership level is going to be. Because sometimes it's going to be significantly higher than it should be.
Yeah, Jeff, I think you get an interesting point there. A lot of it, and sure, not to get too much into the sausage, but, plenty of, people are generally value and projection conscious in NBA. I think the game, like the DFS is sophisticated enough now where everybody has access to some level of projections or information. People generally know, if the backup point guard is playing, then he represents value, and that's kind of like the low-hanging fruit. So it is a big component of what drives ownership. But there is that kind of second level of ownership is also about perception, right? And you can have factors like, for example, like a high pace or a high team total that are baked into projections, but it's not, ownership doesn't necessarily follow it on pace. People can over or underreact. I know you and I have had a lot of interesting back and forth on look what happens when teams play Phoenix, a high pace team, or Philadelphia, who has really low DVP. Sure, that's baked into the projections and people are aware of that, but are people weighting it too much? And you're able to pick up on some of those things as long as you have them in. It's like once you can encapsulate that as inputs to a model, you can see how people value that in general. And sometimes it's different on 2 and 5 and 10 game slates. So accounting for that complexity, it is really interesting to see how people perceive things and how that shakes out in ownership.
Yeah, kind of going off that Philly Phoenix thing, I thought that was really interesting when we kind of looked over that. And I think people kind of just on a cursory level when they're looking on guys, which guys to play on a certain day, just kind of look, hey, I'm going to target, Philly. I'm going to target Phoenix. I'm going to target these high-paced teams automatically and not really get into the nuance and, if this is actually a good play, because these plays don't hit, all the time. There's, a significant miss rate as well. I mean, people just kind of assume that just because they're generally, they more conducive to fantasy value doesn't mean it's just gonna, keep you can't keep going back to that well all the time. And I think people don't learn enough and aren't sophisticated enough yet to kind of exercise judgment and kind of hold back and control themselves when a juicy matchup maybe on paper isn't really a great spot overall.
Yeah, for sure.
To say nothing of the fact that it isn't worth that higher ownership too, and that's really the next level stuff. Where that's like they're not even at that. So I agree.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Colin. We've been on pods in PGA pods together for a while. We talk about ownership. We talk about guys, and we see in a sport like PGA, NFL, really any other sport other than NBA. Oftentimes there's just sort of a cap on how highly owned a guy is going to be. A quarterback's not going to be owned more than 30%, at the very, very max. And most of the time, our projected ownership for quarterbacks is sort of skewed in the 12 to 15% range, is sort of the upper range, just because there's so many options. NBA, Russell Westbrook without Kevin Durant, 70% owned. Was that something that was just, it's just going into NBA and starting to work on it? Was that something that surprised you and something you had to deal with in this ownership projection model, was just trying to deal with just the crazy high ownership marks of some of these guys?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like the Russell Westbrook show last year when Durant was out was one of the first things that Justin and I talked about. And I guess don't get me wrong, I am happy about like what the model is churning out now, but there are certain dynamics where, just beyond like the raw numbers, like there probably is some element of like the model doesn't necessarily know that Russell Westbrook looks like a nuclear reactor that's pissed off when he's playing without Durant, and there is some entertainment value of that. And that type of knowledge is something that I think what I'm really happy about going forward is that this thing, we're not going to have this on autopilot. There will always be the judgment of like the NBA team and like basically like, Justin, Jay, and John overlooking this thing. And as much hype as analytics and data science and predictive everything gets these days, the best approach has always been a combination of, a well-done model and a subject matter expert that knows where to deviate from the model. And I think the combination we have going here from the back and forth that we had is really superior to any single approach kind of doing it on their own. So there is that element of, the model doesn't know about what the Russell Westbrook show is, but Justin does. And we have a pretty good feel for how to adjust it on the fly to make sure that your misses aren't going to be that bad.
Yeah, and that's important, Justin. That's something that we pride ourselves on is being there and for news and for projections and for ownership projections in that case as well. So, we have models that, try to, we use the data to try to be as accurate as possible, but, we also put in a lot of man hours to make sure that everything is perfect as possible.
Yeah, there's certainly, elements like the Russell Westbrook factor that aren't, easily capturable, in something like that. So definitely a human element is needed in situations like that. I think Colin and I have had a lot of back and forth too, and, continuing to try to improve the ownership projection, accounting better for late news and getting more sophisticated with that. Something that we've talked about together is that, if Kevin Durant's this is a loose example, but if Kevin Durant's scratched at in the morning, at 10 a.m. Pacific, he's going to be Russell Westbrook's going to be a lot higher owned than if Kevin Durant was scratched 5 minutes before lock, for example. I think the time of the injury, the time of the news plays a factor in that as well. How much time people have to process the information and make decisions based off that has to do with it as well. Just a lot of different nuances that the nature of NBA creates, where it's difficult to really nail this down. And that's why like Colin talked about, this is a non-linear process, and it just can't be easily captured.
Yeah. Well, one thing I completely forgot, I'm just used to Colin being on PGA pods with me, and everyone knows, the fact that we do that, knows him on those pods. I sort of forgot that our NBA folks might not know who Colin is. So I'll just briefly brag on Colin, because they might be thinking, all right, why is this PGA dude, thinking he's going to come into NBA and build us some projection model. I'll just brag on Colin real quick, is he is the 2-time defending champ of the MIT Sloan Hackathon. And both were NFL projects, right, Colin?
One was NFL, the other it's still football, but high school charting data, kind of like next level, like unreleased to the public data type stuff.
So you do other, non-PGA stuff. You can branch out to other sports.
I do. There's probably not a sport I haven't touched at this point. I think I cut my teeth in sports analytics and tennis. Actually, you can probably find all my SB Nation doing tournament forecasts and original research and stuff. I've done a little bit of college football as well. I even have some NASCAR stuff in the back that is kind of unreleased to the public now for internal stuff. But yeah, at some point, like all these sports. This is all numbers. Like at some point, our running joke on the PGA podcast is I don't actually watch golf a whole lot because I don't need to when it's all data points in a database.
Yeah, which is a fun back and forth with you and Pete every week. It's very fun. But yeah, and Colin has told me that anytime tennis turns into a DFS sport, he's ready to roll. The models are ready to go.
So good to go. Like, I mean, it's probably second only to when they make the Bachelorette a DFS sport. I think all of FantasyLabs will be dropping.
Yeah, I think Bales has you beat there. Sorry, Colin.
I know. Like, that's gonna at the very least, our inner office pool is gonna get really competitive.
Oh, it'll be intense. Yeah, we got some sharp Bachelor players, that's for sure. Cool. So I guess let's quickly touch on, what are we going to use this stuff for? It's going to be in our models. But I will say that, this is something that we're going to discuss a lot. It's going to be in a lot of our content. We're going to have, like I said with Justin in our intro pod the other night, we're going to have a written breakdown that breaks down the slate. We're going to have our regular podcast. And Justin, I would say, we talk a lot of real basketball in those pods, but I would say that our ability to have ownership projections is going to be sort of at the forefront of everything we talk about. The moment we have it now, it sort of just becomes the most important thing that we have.
Right, absolutely, because it is kind of unexplored frontier that no one else kind of has, and no one else has as good a grasp on as Colin. So it's really an added edge, the biggest edge that we can offer to our NBA users, to give them something like that, a piece of information that is incredibly valuable in making their tournament decisions. So I'm really excited about that, obviously, and yeah, I think we're gonna want to put it all over content and feature prominently as it should.
Yeah, and we did add historical ownership into our trends tool, which if you were an NBA subscriber last year, that was a premium tool that only pro subscribers use. And since then, for this new 2016-17 NBA season, our trends tool is completely free. So you can run trends, you can find value on players, and you can also see the historical ownership. So we have back ownership, and then we have projected looking forward ownership. So we have ownership all over the place. It's definitely going to be sort of at the forefront. Everything that we talk about in NBA and our content and our pods, periscopes, whatever we're doing, it's going to be at the forefront. Anything else you guys want to talk about? Colin, you got anything else?
No, I'm just excited to see how it plays out during the year. And obviously, we're going to have to do another model once we actually start to affect ownership, because our projections are so good, and then feeding that back into a model. And then we get some, I don't know, this is like Inception. What level of Leo DiCaprio's stream am I actually on? And what fifth level order and all of that stuff. Nothing but the finest Christopher Nolan references here on FantasyLabs. Yes, don't worry.
Come to expect nothing less. Justin, you got anything else?
No, I was just looking forward to the back and forth with Colin, working on this, making it continually better, nodding my head like I understand his Chris Nolan references, which I don't.
Oh, Justin.
Our PGA podcast gets so much more obscure. Like, and that's probably like 90% my fault. I'm playing to an audience of 4 every single time.
But yeah, I think some interesting dynamics that we'll have to look for is this new rule, especially with DK no more late swap. If this, especially like the ownership aspect with guys who are questionable at lock, not being able to late swap anymore. Kind of interested in how that dynamic affects things. Colin and I are going to continually monitor this thing and see how it does and make adjustments as needed. So I'm really excited about that, and excited to learn from Colin on this and get a little smarter.
2 Warriors guys doing NBA stuff.
I'm a Bulls guy. How many times do I have to tell you?
But you're
around
the Warriors
by like proximity because he lives in.
At the time of recording this, the Cubs are getting 3 hit by Rich Hill, which is all of my worst nightmares coming true. But that is neither here.
Yeah, we'll root for you. I am rooting for the Cubs, not the Warriors. That are never the Warriors. Cool. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us. Everyone, thanks for listening. You can follow us on Twitter. Justin Phan is at jfaned. Colin is at 80j baseline. So follow us on Twitter. I'm at Bryan_Mears. Shoot us any questions you may have. We're going to have a lot more information on projected ownership. We're going to have some videos. We're going to have some tutorials. It'll be in a lot of our content coming up. So we will definitely make sure that you guys understand and are able to use everything that's happening. But we're really, really excited and can't wait for you guys to get into these tools and use them starting next week for NBA. So thanks again for listening. We're watching, and we'll talk to you guys pretty soon.
Thanks, guys.